The air in the room is thick with the weight of an ending. It is a stillness that is not peace, but the quiet after a storm has passed and left only ruin. Here in the heart of Uruk, the greatest city on earth, a king is learning the first and last lesson of power, its absolute uselessness. Gilgamesh, two-thirds a god, ruler of men, a wild bull of a king whose footstep once shook the foundations of the world, is on his knees. His gaze is fixed not on a throne, nor a crown, nor the spoils of a conquered land, but on the face of the only person he has ever considered his equal, the face of Enkidu. And Enkidu is no longer there. The body remains, a sculpture of memory cooling on the bed, but the fire that mirrored his own has been extinguished. Gilgamesh leans closer, his ear hovering over lips that will never speak again, searching for the whisper of a breath, the faintest flutter of life. He finds only the profound silence of matter that has ceased to strive. For 7 days and 7 nights he has not moved. He has watched, a sentinel at the gate of a city already sacked. He watched as the vibrant life, the restless energy of his friend, his brother, ebbed away like a relentless tide. He saw the sweat bead on Enkidu's brow, then the pallor creep into his skin, the color of old clay. He heard the stories, the fevered dreams of the underworld, a house of dust where kings and priests sit in darkness, eating dirt and clay, their crowns gathering cobwebs in a forgotten corner. A place where there is no light, no warmth, no memory of the sun. Enkidu had described it, his voice a dry rasp, and Gilgamesh had refused to listen. He had commanded the fever to break. He had bellowed at the gods. He had offered them anything, everything. But the gods, in their distant, silent heavens, were not bargaining. Now in the suffocating quiet of the seventh day, something shifts. It is not in the room, but in the body of his friend. A small, pale thing, a worm, emerges from Enkidu's nose. It is a detail of such obscene finality, so mundane in its horror, that it shatters the king's godlike denial. This is not sleep. This is not a journey from which one returns. This is unmaking. This is the slow, methodical return of a man to the dirt from which he was formed. A terror, cold and sharp, pierces through Gilgamesh's grief. It is a terror he has never known, for he has never faced an enemy he could not smash, a wall he could not break. But this quiet corruption, this patient, silent victory of the worm, this is a force beyond strength, beyond power, beyond kingship. He looks from the still decaying face of Enkidu to his own hands, the hands of a demigod, and for the first time he understands that they are made of the same fragile clay. The terror that seizes him is not just for his friend, it is for himself. He feels the worm in his own nose. He feels the dust gathering in his own lungs, and he finally truly screams, a raw animal sound of pure fear, the sound of a god discovering his own grave. What does it mean to be alive if this is the end? What is the purpose of strength, the point of glory, the value of building a city that reaches for the heavens if our bodies are merely clay vessels destined to crack and crumble into dust? This is the question that explodes in the heart of Gilgamesh, a question that has echoed in the heart of every human being who has ever stood at a graveside, who has ever felt the cold touch of their own finitude. It is the first and most fundamental human question, born in the dust of Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago, and it has never been answered. It can only be lived. Gilgamesh, the mighty king, is about to be stripped of everything he thought he was, to embark on a journey not for a crown or a conquest, but for an answer. A journey to the edge of the world, a journey into the heart of his own terror, to confront the very nature of what it means to be human in a universe that promises nothing. His quest would become our first great story, the epic of humanity's desperate, eternal struggle against its own shadow, the inescapable reality of death. Before the silence of the deathbed, there was the noise of Uruk, a city humming with the power of its king. To understand the depth of Gilgamesh's fall, we must first understand the height from which he fell. Imagine walking through the streets of his city before Enkidu. The sun is a merciless hammer, beating down on the baked brick walls that rise like man-made mountains from the flat alluvial plain. The air is a tapestry of smells, the sharp, earthy scent of the river Euphrates, the aroma of baking bread from 1,000 unseen ovens, the dust of construction, the sweat of laborers, and underneath it all, a faint metallic tang, the smell of fear. The sounds of the city are orchestrated by Gilgamesh's will. You hear the rhythmic clang of hammers on bronze, the murmur of merchants in the marketplace, the lowing of cattle, but listen closer. You also hear what is missing. The boisterous laughter is muted, the public arguments are hushed. The people move with a purpose that is not their own, their eyes downcast, avoiding the gaze of the palace guards who patrol the avenues like bronze statues given menacing life. The city is a marvel of order of civilization, but it is the order of a cage. The touch of the city is one of extremes. The searing heat of a brick wall under your palm, the cool relief of a shadowed alleyway, the rough weave of a commoner's tunic against your skin. And the taste of Uruk is the taste of power. For the king's court, it is spiced wine and roasted lamb. For the people, it is the simple, gritty taste of bread and the bitter flavor of resentment, chewed and swallowed day after day. And at the center of this world, like the unblinking eye of the sun itself, is Gilgamesh, two-thirds divine, one-third human, a creation of the gods so perfect in his strength and beauty that he was a walking monument to their power. But his human third, that small fraction of mortality, was a seed of chaos. He was a king without a check, a power without a balance. He strode through his city not as a shepherd, but as a wild bull, trampling the very fields he was meant to protect. He took what he wanted. He demanded the sons of Uruk for his armies and his building projects, working them until they collapsed. And he claimed the daughters of Uruk for his bed, exercising the horrifying droit du seigneur, the lord's right to the first night with any new bride. He was a storm that never passed, a fever that never broke. His people prayed to the gods, not for prosperity or for rain, but for relief from the very king who was supposed to be their conduit to the divine. He was a hero without an equal, and in that solitude he had become a monster. The gods heard the cries. They looked down and saw their creation, this perfect being, had become a source of misery. They understood the problem was not one of strength but of balance, and so they decided to create not his destruction but his mirror. In the vast, untamed wilderness beyond the city walls, they fashioned a second man. Araru, the goddess of creation, pinched off a piece of clay, the same stuff of the earth that formed all mortals, and shaped a man as wild as Gilgamesh was civilized. His name was Enkidu. He was magnificent, a being of pure nature. His body was covered in matted hair. His locks were long and wild like a woman's, growing thick like the barley of the fields. He knew nothing of cities or cultivated land. He ran with the gazelles, his legs as swift as theirs. He drank from the waterholes alongside the wild beasts, his senses alive to the whisper of the wind and the scent of a predator on the air. He was a part of the world, not its master. He was the world before the wall, before the plow, before the king. He was everything Gilgamesh was not, and he was the answer to Uruk's prayers. The creation of an equal is the first step toward wisdom, but the journey from the wild to the city is a profound and violent transformation. It is a story of what we gain and what we irrevocably lose in the process of becoming human. Enkidu's existence was discovered by a trapper, whose pits Enkidu would fill in and whose snares he would release, protecting the animals he considered his kin. The trapper, terrified and frustrated, went to Uruk and told King Gilgamesh of this wild man who thwarted civilization. Gilgamesh, intrigued by the tale of a being who could match his own rumored strength, devised a plan. It was a plan that understood the fundamental force that separates the wild from the settled world. He would not send a warrior, he would send a woman. He chose Shamhat, a temple prostitute, a woman whose profession placed her at the very threshold of nature and culture, the sacred and the profane. She traveled to the wilderness and waited by the waterhole where Enkidu drank. When he appeared with the gazelles at his side, she did not hide. She revealed herself to him. For Enkidu, who had known only the company of animals, the sight of her was a revelation. For 6 days and 7 nights they were together. In that time, Shamhat initiated him into the world of humanity. It was more than a physical act, it was a transmission of knowledge, of a new way of being. Imagine Enkidu's senses, previously honed to the subtlest changes in his natural environment. The sight of her was not like the sight of a doe or a lioness. It was complex, layered with intention and meaning he could not yet decipher. The sound of her voice was not the call of a bird or the growl of a beast. It was patterned, rhythmic, carrying stories and ideas. The smell of her was not of musk and earth, but of oils and perfumes, the scent of a world made, not born. The touch of her skin was not the rough bark of a tree or the fur of a fellow creature. It was a conscious, deliberate contact that communicated something beyond instinct. After their week together, Enkidu rose to return to his herd, but when the gazelles saw him, they shied away. The wild beasts fled from his presence. He tried to run with them, but his knees buckled, his legendary speed was gone. Something had broken inside him. His wild body had been changed, but it was his mind that had been irrevocably altered. He had gained a new kind of awareness, a consciousness that separated him from the seamless world of nature. He was no longer a part of it, he was an observer, he had lost his innocence. Shamhat then spoke to him, "You are wise now, Enkidu, you have become like a god. Why do you roam the wilderness with beasts? Come with me." A thought entered Enkidu's mind, a lonely human thought. I want to meet this man, I want to challenge him. Shamhat then clothed him, sharing her own garment. She brought him to a shepherd's camp, a halfway point between the wild and the city. There he was faced with another threshold of civilization, cooked food. The shepherds placed bread and beer before him. He stared at them confused. He had only ever eaten grass and drunk water from the river. Shamhat guided him. Eat the bread, Enkidu. It is the staff of life. Drink the beer. It is the custom of the land. He ate the bread and his face lit up. He drank 7 goblets of the beer and his heart grew light. He relaxed, sang, and washed his matted hair. He anointed his body with oil and put on clothes. He had become a man. He took up a weapon and stood guard for the shepherds, protecting them from the lions and wolves he once might have considered his brothers. The transformation was complete. He had traded the freedom of the wild for the responsibility of society. He had traded instinct for reason. He had lost his place in the natural world, but he was now ready to find his destiny in the world of men. He was ready to meet Gilgamesh. The arrival of Enkidu in Uruk was an earthquake. The people gathered, marveling at this man who seemed to have the strength of a celestial body. They saw in him a challenger, a perfect double for their oppressive king. The confrontation was inevitable, and it came at a moment of Gilgamesh's greatest tyranny. The king was on his way to a wedding chamber to claim his right of the first night. Enkidu, now a champion of the people he had so recently joined, stood in the doorway and blocked his path. The two titans stared at each other. In that moment, they recognized themselves. They saw their own strength, their own loneliness, their own destiny standing before them. They clashed. The doorpost of the house shattered. The walls of the city trembled. They wrestled in the street like raging bulls, the ground shaking beneath them. The people of Uruk watched, breathless, as the two halves of a single, immense power sought to dominate one another. Gilgamesh, for the first time in his life, felt an equal force pushing back. He felt the strain in his muscles, the burning in his lungs. He was matched. Finally, with a great effort, Gilgamesh bent his knee to the ground. He had won, but only barely. And then the fight was over, the rage dissipated, replaced by a sudden, profound calm. Gilgamesh looked at Enkidu not as a conquered foe, but as the brother he had never had. Enkidu looked back, and in the king's eyes he saw not a tyrant, but a man as lonely as himself. They embraced, they kissed, they had found each other. And in that moment, the tyranny of Gilgamesh ended. His restless, destructive energy now had a focus, a partner. He had found his other half, and Uruk had found its salvation. Their friendship became the new center of the world. They were inseparable, two sides of a single heroic coin. But this newfound peace brought with it a new kind of restlessness. The heroic energy that had once been turned inward against the people of Uruk now needed an outlet. It needed a grand stage. Gilgamesh, his heart full of the fire of their bond, turned to Enkidu and proposed a quest, a deed so great that their names would be remembered for all time. He proposed they travel to the legendary Cedar forest, a place forbidden to mortals, to slay its terrifying guardian, the monster Humbaba, and bring back the sacred cedars to Uruk. This quest was their first, youthful attempt to conquer death. Not the reality of it, but the idea of it, the idea of being forgotten. They sought to build an immortal name for themselves, to carve their story into the memory of the world so deeply that it could never be erased. It was a glorious, arrogant, and ultimately tragic ambition. Enkidu, who knew the wilderness, was filled with fear. He described Humbaba: his roar is the floodwater, his mouth is fire, his breath is death. He warned Gilgamesh that this was a battle they could not win, but Gilgamesh was resolute. Only the gods live forever under the sun, he said. As for mankind, their days are numbered. Whatever they achieve is but wind. Why should you be afraid of death? I will go before you, and if I fall, I will have made a name for myself. It was the creed of the hero, the belief that a glorious death was a victory over a long, forgotten life. It was a creed that would be tested to its breaking point. Together, they prepared for the journey, armed and blessed by the elders of Uruk and by Gilgamesh's divine mother, the goddess Ninsun. They set out, two friends against the unknown, to challenge the very limits of the mortal world. Unaware that in seeking an eternal name, they were setting in motion a chain of events that would lead them to confront the stark and terrible reality of an eternal end. The journey to the Cedar forest was a descent into a world untouched by human hands, a realm of primal divinity and ancient fear. For 6 days they traveled, their pace supernatural, covering in a day what would take an ordinary man a month and a half. With each step, the familiar landscape of Mesopotamia, the flat plains and river valleys, gave way to something older and more menacing. They climbed mountains that scraped the sky, their peaks shrouded in a permanent mist. the air grew colder, thinner. The civilized world, with its predictable rhythms and human sounds, fell away behind them, replaced by the vast, echoing silence of the wild. This was Enkidu's former world, but seen now through human eyes, it was terrifying. He was no longer a part of its seamless fabric, he was an intruder. Imagine the forest as they finally reached its edge. It was not a welcoming grove of trees, but a fortress of nature. The cedars were colossal, their trunks so wide that 3 men holding hands could not encircle them. They soared into the sky, their highest branches lost in the clouds, creating a dense canopy that plunged the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. The light that filtered through was green and murky, like light seen through deep water. The visual world was one of towering verticals, of deep shadows and sudden blinding shafts of sunlight that seemed to spotlight strange, moss-covered shapes. The soundscape was unnervingly quiet. The familiar chorus of birds and insects was absent. All they could hear was the sighing of the wind in the high branches, a sound like a distant ocean, and the unnerving crack of a twig under their own feet, a sound that seemed deafening in the profound stillness. The air itself smelled ancient. It was a rich, complex perfume of damp earth, decaying leaves, sweet, sharp pine resin, and something else, an ozone-like charge, the scent of a powerful, non-human presence. The ground under their feet was soft and spongy with centuries of fallen needles. The bark of the cedars was rough and cool to the touch, like the skin of some great, sleeping reptile. Everything in this place whispered of a power far older and greater than any king or city. This was the domain of Humbaba, the guardian placed there by the gods. To enter was an act of profound sacrilege. As they ventured deeper, their heroic resolve began to fray. Enkidu was paralyzed by fear, his hands numb. Gilgamesh fought to bolster his friend's courage, but he too was assailed by terrifying dreams each night when they made camp. He dreamed of a mountain collapsing, of a terrifying thunderbird that rained down fire, of being seized by a wild bull. Each dream was a prophecy of their doom, and each morning Enkidu would interpret them, trying to find a sliver of hope, a sign that they might yet prevail. They were 2 small, fragile beings, trespassing in a sacred world, and the forest itself seemed to be watching them, judging them. Finally, they reached the heart of the forest, the sacred sanctuary of the cedars, and stood before the gate. Humbaba sensed them. A roar erupted from the depths of the woods, a sound that was not merely loud but elemental. It was the sound of a rock slide, of a flood, of the earth itself splitting open. The ground shook. The sky seemed to darken. Humbaba emerged. He was a creature of nightmare, his face a grotesque mask of knotted wood and fury, his teeth the tusks of a boar, his breath a foul, hot wind. The battle that followed was a clash of worlds. It was the ambition of humanity against the raw power of nature. It was the will of 2 mortals against a servant of the gods. They fought with all their strength, Gilgamesh like a lion, Enkidu like a phantom. The sun god, Shamash, seeing their plight, unleashed the great winds against Humbaba, the north wind, the south wind, the whirlwind, the storm wind, blinding the monster, trapping him, holding him immobile. Gilgamesh seized his moment, his axe flashing. Humbaba was defeated. The monster, pinned by the winds, pleaded for his life. He promised to be Gilgamesh's servant, to give him all the sacred cedars. For a moment Gilgamesh was moved to pity, but Enkidu, his fear replaced by a cold fury, urged him on. Do not listen to him, he will betray you, kill him. Gilgamesh struck. The forest groaned in protest. A shudder ran through the ancient trees as their guardian fell. They had done the impossible. They had slain a demigod. They began to fell the sacred cedars, their axes ringing out in the now silent forest, the sound of their victory. They built a raft, and with the head of Humbaba as their gruesome trophy, they floated back down the Euphrates to Uruk, triumphant. They returned as heroes, their names now etched, they believed, into eternity. But they had not just killed a monster, they had defied the gods, they had upset a sacred balance, and in the divine world every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Their glorious victory in the cedar forest had planted the seeds of a devastating loss. Their return to Uruk was the pinnacle of their glory. The city celebrated its heroes. Gilgamesh washed the grime of the journey from his body, anointed himself with oil, and put on his royal robes. He was breathtaking, a vision of power and divine beauty. It was in this moment of peak magnificence that he caught the eye of a goddess. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, the most powerful and volatile of the goddesses, saw him and was consumed by desire. She appeared before him, offering him everything. Be my husband, Gilgamesh, she promised. I will give you a chariot of lapis lazuli and gold, with wheels of gold and horns of amber. You will be harnessed with great storm demons, all the lands will bow down to you and bring you tribute. It was an offer of divinity of a life beyond mortal cares, but Gilgamesh, flush with his victory and his unbreakable friendship, was arrogant. He rejected her, and he did not just reject her, he insulted her. He recounted the fates of her previous mortal lovers. A shepherd she turned into a wolf, a gardener she turned into a mole. He called her a faulty door that lets in the wind, a shoe that bites its owner's foot. Ishtar's desire turned instantly to incandescent rage. Her pride wounded, her divine status mocked by a mere mortal, she ascended to the heavens and went before her father Anu, the king of the gods. She demanded vengeance. "Father," she wept, "Gilgamesh has insulted me, he has listed all my foul deeds." She demanded that Anu create the Bull of Heaven, a colossal beast of cosmic destruction, and send it down to destroy Gilgamesh and his city. Anu hesitated, warning her that the bull would cause 7 years of famine in Uruk, but Ishtar was relentless. She threatened to smash the gates of the underworld and release the dead to feast upon the living. Terrified by her threat, Anu relented. The Bull of Heaven was unleashed upon the earths. Its descent was an apocalypse. Where it set its foot, the ground cracked open and hundreds of men fell into the chasm. Its snort was a hurricane that dried up the rivers and withered the crops. Uruk was plunged into chaos, but Gilgamesh and Enkidu, their bond forged in the battle with Humbaba, did not flinch. They faced the celestial monster together. Enkidu, with his wild instincts, circled the beast, grabbing it by the tail, while Gilgamesh, with his heroic strength, plunged his sword into the back of its neck, killing it. It was another impossible victory. In their moment of triumph, as the people of Uruk praised them, Enkidu, in a final act of defiance, tore off the bull's thigh and hurled it at Ishtar, who was watching from the city walls. "If I could lay my hands on you," he shouted, "I would do the same to you." The sacrilege was complete. They had not only rejected a goddess, they had humiliated her. They had killed her divine instrument of vengeance and desecrated its body. They had declared in the clearest possible terms that they were the masters of their own destiny. That night the gods gathered in council. Their deliberation was grim. Anu declared that because Gilgamesh and Enkidu had killed Humbaba and the Bull of Heaven, one of them must die. The great god Enlil, the one who had appointed Humbaba as guardian, decreed that Enkidu should be the one to pay the price. He was the wild man, the one who had come from nature. Perhaps his ties to the mortal world were weaker. Or perhaps it was a crueler punishment to let Gilgamesh, the leader, the two-thirds god, live to watch his other half die. The verdict was passed. A cosmic balance had been disturbed, and it would be righted with the life of one man. That night, Enkidu had a dream. He saw the gods passing judgment, and he knew his fate was sealed. He awoke, filled with a dread colder than any fear he had known in the cedar forest. He turned to Gilgamesh, his brother, and told him of the dream. Their celebration turned to ashes. Their victory was a death sentence. The long, slow agony of Enkidu's death began, and with it, the true education of King Gilgamesh. He was about to learn that the names of heroes may be carved in stone, but their bodies are written in water. The illness that took Enkidu was not a swift, clean blow from a sword. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of a hero. For 12 days, he lay wasting away, a prisoner in his own body, while Gilgamesh sat helplessly beside him. In his delirium, Enkidu cursed the trapper who found him, the temple prostitute who tamed him, the great gate of the city he had entered. He cursed the very path that had led him from the freedom of the wild to the fatal glory of civilization. He raged against a fate he could not fight, an enemy he could not see. But then the sun god Shamash spoke to him from the heavens, reminding him of the joys his human life had brought him, the deep friendship with Gilgamesh, the fine food and royal robes, the love of the people. Enkidu grew calm. He retracted his curses and accepted his end. This acceptance was a final, painful piece of wisdom, a wisdom Gilgamesh was not yet ready to learn. He could only watch as his friend, his strength, his mirror grew weaker, his voice fainter, his skin colder. The vibrant force of nature that was Enkidu was being unmade before his eyes, day by day, hour by hour. And then came the final stillness, the silence, and the obscene punctuation of the worm. Gilgamesh's scream gives way to a terrible, frantic grief. He veils his friend's face like a bride, paces around the bed like an eagle circling its kill, tears at his hair and his fine robes. He is a king undone, a demigod reduced to a purely human agony. For 7 days and 7 nights he waits, hoping against hope for a sign, a twitch, a breath. But Enkidu's body only grows colder, stiffer, more alien. The reality of its decay becomes undeniable. He finally allows the people of Uruk to perform the funeral rites. He commissions a magnificent statue of his friend, of gold and lapis lazuli, but the gesture feels hollow. It is an effigy, a monument to an absence. The true monument, the living, breathing friend, is gone, and a new, terrifying presence has taken its place in Gilgamesh's heart, the absolute certainty of his own death. When I die, he wails to himself, will I not be just like Enkidu? Sorrow has entered my heart. This fear becomes his new king, his new god. It commands him, and he obeys without question. He can no longer bear to be in Uruk, the city that is a constant reminder of his loss and his future doom. He abandons his throne, his people, his responsibilities. He sheds his royal garments and dons the rough, hairy skins of a lion, a symbol of his grief and his return to a wilder, more primitive state. He begins to wander. His journey has no destination, only a motivation to escape the fate of Enkidu. His mind fixes on a single, desperate hope. A legend, a rumor of a man who survived the Great Flood, a man who was granted eternal life by the gods themselves. His name is Utnapishti, and he lives at the ends of the earth. Gilgamesh resolves to find him, to force from him the secret of everlasting life. His quest is no longer for fame, it is for existence itself. It is a mad, impossible journey, a rejection of the fundamental law of the universe. It is the quest of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. His journey takes him through a world that grows stranger and more hostile with every step. The landscape becomes a reflection of his own inner turmoil. He travels across scorching deserts and into dark forests, his body growing lean and weathered, his face etched with sorrow and a wild, obsessive determination. He fights lions in the mountain passes, not for glory, but with a desperate, animalistic fury. He finally arrives at the twin peaks of Mashu, the mountains that guard the rising and setting of the sun, whose gates are guarded by two terrifying beings, scorpion men whose gaze is death. They see the fear and sorrow in his face, and they recognize the divine part of him. They take pity on him and allow him to pass through the gate, into a tunnel of absolute darkness through which the sun travels at night. For 12 long leagues, he stumbles through the oppressive, sightless dark, a journey through a symbolic underworld, until he finally emerges, blinking, into a garden of wonders. It is a garden of the gods, where the trees bear fruit of carnelian and the leaves are made of lapis lazuli. It is a place of divine beauty, but Gilgamesh is blind to it. His mind is fixed on his one goal. In this magical garden by the sea, he finds a tavern kept by a wise woman named Siduri. She sees his haggard appearance, his wild eyes, and at first mistakes him for a murderer. She bars her door, but Gilgamesh tells her his story, the story of Enkidu, of his overwhelming fear of death. Siduri listens, and then she gives him the first dose of real wisdom he has encountered on his journey. It is a simple, devastatingly profound piece of advice. Gilgamesh, where are you wandering? She asks gently. The life that you seek you never will find. When the gods created mankind, death they dispensed to mankind, life they kept for themselves. As for you, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full, be happy day and night, make every day a festival of joy, day and night dance and play, let your clothes be clean, let your head be washed and bathe yourself in water. Look at the child who is holding your hand, and let your wife delight in your embrace. It is the philosophy of carpe diem, of embracing the simple, tangible, mortal joys of life. It is the answer to his question, but it is an answer he is not yet capable of hearing. To him, it sounds like a surrender, a consolation prize for the ultimate defeat. He rejects her wisdom. He is not interested in the joys of a finite life. He wants to abolish the finish line altogether. Seeing his resolve, Siduri tells him how to proceed. To reach Utnapishti, he must cross the waters of death, an ocean that no mortal has ever sailed. She directs him to Shanabi, the ferryman of Utnapishti. In a fit of rage and impatience, Gilgamesh smashes the stone things, the sacred objects that allow Shanabi's boat to safely cross the waters. It is another act of hubris, another mistake born of his desperate grief. Shanabi tells him that by destroying the stone things, he has made his own passage impossible. His only hope now is to cut down hundreds of long poles from the forest. He must use each pole only once to push the boat, for if his hand so much as touches the lethal water, he will die. With immense labor, Gilgamesh accomplishes the task. Together, he and Shanabi cross the waters of death, a long, perilous journey that finally brings him to a distant shore, to the home of Utnapishti the faraway. He has done it, he has reached the end of the world. He stands before the one man who has cheated death. Utnapishti looks at him, this wild, grief-stricken king, and sees not a hero but a man running from a truth. Gilgamesh pours out his story, his question burning in his eyes. How did you find eternal life? And Utnapishti finally tells him the secret. It is not a secret of strength or wisdom or a magic ritual. It is the story of a divine catastrophe and an arbitrary choice. He tells Gilgamesh the story of the Great Flood. He speaks of a time when the gods, annoyed by the noise of the teeming human population, decided to wipe them all out. But one god, the god of wisdom, took pity on Utnapishti. In a dream, warned him to tear down his house and build a great boat to save himself, his family, and the seed of all living things. Utnapishti obeyed. He built the ark, and for 6 days and 7 nights a terrible storm raged, and the world was drowned. When the waters receded, he was the only human left alive. The gods, seeing what they had done, felt remorse. And the great god Enlil, the very one who had caused the flood, came aboard his boat and, as a unique, unrepeatable act of recompense, granted Utnapishti and his wife the one thing no other mortal could have: eternal life. He made them like gods and sent them to live here at the mouth of the rivers. The story hangs in the air between them, a final, insurmountable wall. Immortality, Utnapishti explains, was not an achievement, it was a gift, it was an anomaly. It was the result of a singular event in the history of the cosmos that would never happen again. The decree of the gods was clear: for all other humans, death is the inescapable rule. This is the moment where the philosophy of the epic becomes explicit. The boundary between gods and mortals is absolute. It is not a challenge to be overcome, but a fundamental characteristic of existence, a law of cosmic physics. To be human is to be mortal. The striving for anything else is a category error, a misunderstanding of one's own nature. He has traveled to the edge of reality to ask the universe for an exception, and the universe has calmly, irrevocably refused. Inside Gilgamesh, something must have crumbled, the last embers of his desperate hope. The journey, the suffering, the monsters, the mountains of darkness, all of it had led him to this quiet shore, to a simple, unchangeable fact. He must have felt a profound sense of injustice. Why him? Why Enkidu? Why create a being with such strength, such love, such a will to live, only to decree that he must be extinguished? This is the inner cry of Gilgamesh, the inner cry of humanity. It is the protest against the terms of our existence. But Utnapishti is not finished. He looks at the exhausted king and offers him a test, a way to demonstrate the vast gulf between mortal nature and the divine state he craves. Sleep, it is the younger brother of death, the small, daily surrender of consciousness that all mortals must make. For Gilgamesh, a hero who has conquered monsters and traveled through the sun's tunnel, it seems a trivial challenge. He accepts. He sits down, determined to prove his divine mettle, to show that his will is stronger than his flesh. And almost immediately, a mist of sleep, like a fog rolling in from the sea, envelops him. He slumps over, defeated not by a monster or a god, but by his own biology. His body, weary from its impossible journey, simply claims what it is owed. Utnapishti turns to his wife with a weary, knowing sigh. "Look at this strong man who wants to live forever," he says. Sleep is blowing over him like a storm. He understands that this is the most powerful proof of all. If a man cannot even conquer the need for rest, how can he hope to conquer the final rest of death? To mark the passage of time and provide undeniable proof of Gilgamesh's failure, Utnapishti's wife bakes a loaf of bread for each day he sleeps. She places the first loaf by his head. It is fresh and warm. The next day she places a second. The first is now stale. A third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh. By the time Gilgamesh finally stirs and awakens, a week has passed. A line of loaves lies beside him in various states of decay. One is dry, one is moldy, another is crumbling to dust. He awakens and immediately insists, "I had barely fallen asleep when you touched me and woke me up." Utnapishti calmly points to the bread. "Gilgamesh, count your loaves." Gilgamesh looks, and the evidence of his profound human frailty is laid out before him. He saw in the decaying bread the image of his own life, of Enkidu's body. He could not deny it. He had failed. He let out a cry of despair. "What shall I do, Utnapishti? Where shall I go? The snatcher has taken hold of my flesh. Death lives in the room where I sleep." The lesson is complete. He is ready to return to the world of mortals. As he prepares to leave, Utnapishti's wife, taking pity on him for his long and fruitless journey, persuades her husband to give him a parting gift. Utnapishti tells him of a secret, a final, miraculous possibility. "I will tell you a hidden thing, Gilgamesh, a secret of the gods." He describes a plant that grows at the bottom of the sea. It has thorns like a rose that will prick the hand, but if a man can obtain it, it has the power to restore a person's youth. It is not eternal life, but it is a kind of renewal, a way to turn back the clock. It is a sliver of false hope, but for the desperate Gilgamesh, it is everything. He ties heavy stones to his feet and plunges into the deep. He finds the plant, its thorns tearing at his hands, and with a great effort he plucks it from the seabed. He cuts the stones from his feet and is carried back to the surface by the sea, clutching his prize. He shows it to Urshanabi, the ferryman, his heart soaring with a new plan. This plant is the plant of heart's content, he declares. I will carry it back to Uruk, I will give it to the old men to eat, and they will become young again. Then I will eat it myself and be returned to the youth of my glory days. He had failed to gain eternity, but he had found a way to defeat old age. It was a partial victory, but a victory nonetheless. They begin the long journey home. After many days, they come to a cool pool of water. Gilgamesh, feeling safe, eager to wash the salt of the sea from his body, places the precious plant on the bank and dives into the water. The scent of the plant, sweet and potent, drifts on the air. A serpent hidden nearby catches the scent. Silently, it slithers from its hiding place. While Gilgamesh is bathing, lost in his thoughts of triumph and renewal, the snake seizes the plant and carries it away. As it goes, it sheds its old skin, leaving it behind on the ground, a papery ghost. The creature is instantly renewed, made young again. Gilgamesh finishes his bath and climbs out of the pool. He reaches for the plant. It is gone. He sees the snake's skin, the evidence of what has happened. And in that moment, all the strength, all the hope, all the divine will drains out of him. He sits down and weeps. The tears stream down his face. This was his last chance. The final, tangible hope for defying his fate, and it was stolen from him not by a god or a monster, but by a simple, mindless creature of the earth in a moment of common carelessness. It is the ultimate crushing indignity. He had journeyed to the end of the world, faced down death itself, and lost his prize because he decided to take a bath. The universe, it seemed, was not just indifferent but cruelly ironic. He had achieved nothing. His quest was an absolute, total failure. The despair he feels now is different from the frantic grief he felt for Enkidu. It is a quiet, hollow, empty despair. It is the feeling of final defeat. The journey back to Uruk is a silent one. The frantic energy is gone, replaced by a profound, weary resignation. Gilgamesh is no longer a demigod raging against the cosmos. He is simply a man walking home. He has exhausted every possibility of escape. He has confronted the ultimate authorities of the universe and has been turned away. He has held a miracle in his hands and lost it. There is nothing left to do but go back to the life he abandoned. As they approach the great city, Gilgamesh for the first time speaks to Urshanabi. His voice is different. It is calm, measured, devoid of the desperate fire it once held. He lifts his head and looks at his city, really looks at it, perhaps for the first time since he left, and what he sees transforms him. Urshanabi, he says, climb up onto the wall of Uruk, walk along it, I say, and examine its foundation, inspect its brickwork. This is the moment of his true enlightenment. It is not a dramatic revelation from a god, but a quiet, profound shift in his own perception. He is looking at the walls, solid, magnificent, enduring. He is seeing them not merely as a symbol of his power, but as a work of creation, a legacy. In that moment, he finally understands what true immortality is for a human being. It is not the endless, weary life of Utanapishti. It is not the magical renewal of the snake. It is this, the tangible, lasting thing you build that will shelter and serve others long after you are gone. The physical structure becomes a vessel for a name, a story, a memory. The walls of Uruk are his answer. They are his consolation. They are his victory. He realizes that the purpose of his life was not to escape his mortality, but to use his brief, powerful time on Earth to create something that would endure within the realm of mortals. The definition of a successful life, he now sees, is not its length but its contribution. He has found the only immortality that matters. He has finally come to understand the wisdom of Siduri the tavern keeper, but on a deeper level. It is not just about enjoying the simple pleasures of the moment, the food, the drink, the family. It is about taking the strength and time allotted to you and building those very structures that allow for those simple pleasures to exist in safety and community. The king's task is not to become a god, but to be a good shepherd for his mortal flock, to build the sheepfold that will protect them from the wolves of chaos. Gilgamesh, the tyrant who once saw his people as tools for his own glory, now sees his city as the vessel for his true, lasting self. He has completed his journey. He started as a monster, became a hero, descended into a grieving animal, and has now returned as a wise king. He accepts his one-third humanity. He accepts his death. And in that acceptance, he finally becomes whole. This ancient story, etched into clay tablets 4,000 years ago, is not just the story of a mythical Sumerian king. It is the story of us. It is the archetypal human journey. We are all born, like Gilgamesh, with a sense of limitless potential, a belief in our own specialness. And then life introduces us to loss. We watch a grandparent fade away, we lose a friend to an accident or an illness, we confront the death of a parent, and in that loss, we, like Gilgamesh, are forced to confront the stark reality of our own fragile temporary existence. The terror and the grief can send us on our own desperate journeys. We chase after our own plants of rejuvenation. We pour our energy into careers, hoping to build an immortal professional legacy. We obsess over health and anti-aging, hoping to push back the inevitable decay. We curate our digital afterlives on social media, hoping to leave behind a perfect, smiling ghost in the machine. We seek our own eutanapishtis, our own gurus and philosophies that promise a secret to transcending the human condition. But the Epic of Gilgamesh suggests that these quests, while deeply human, are ultimately a distraction from our true work. The story does not offer a comforting lie about an afterlife or a magical escape from our fate. It offers a harder, more profound truth. It tells us that wisdom is not found at the ends of the earth, but in the acceptance of our limits. It suggests that meaning is not found in the length of our lives, but in their depth. The final image of the epic is of a king, standing on the walls of his city at peace with his mortality. He has learned that life's value is measured not in the years you accumulate, but in what you build, who you love, and the story you leave behind. The story of Gilgamesh is the first great work of literature because it dares to ask the most difficult question and provides the most honest, enduring, and human of answers. We cannot escape death. But we can build a life so full of meaning, so dedicated to the creation of things that will outlast us, that our story will be told by those who walk on the walls we leave behind. And perhaps the epic whispers to us across the millennia that is enough. In the end, what are the walls you're building?